The Australian $50 note. It's touched, it's handled, it's exchanged millions of times a day. But the story of the man depicted on that note is to this day largely unknown. And what an untold story it is. David Unaipon, a proud Ngarrindjeri man, was born in 1872 at the Point Macleay Mission in South Australia. He was a preacher, he was an author, and he was a poet. But David's legacy will be that of an inventor. Perpetual motion, a theory that continues to be unsolved. David spent his life trying to achieve it, and it was during this quest that he changed the destiny of Australia as we know it. It was said the economy rode on the sheep's back, and it was an Indigenous man, the fourth of 9 children, from a little mission on the banks of Lake Alexandrina, that changed the fortunes of a nation. It wasn't a laser, it wasn't a helicopter, although David had designs for those too. It was the mechanical hand shears, a simple but revolutionary design that sent ripples around the world.
David was before his time. He had 19 patents, things that we're still working on today. This man was a genius.
In the early 19th century, sheep were shorn with blade shears, similar to garden clippers. Shearing by hand was a lengthy and arduous process that required great skill. Many pastoralists dreamed of a machine that could remove the fleece from a sheep quickly and efficiently. The first authenticated daily tally was only 30 sheep. By the time mechanical shears were the norm, an average shearer could shear in excess of 300 sheep a day.
It's just amazing that something that he invented over 100 years ago and the technology is still there in the handpiece.
The cornerstone of Indigenous culture is based on respect and acknowledgement of those who came before. And David's legacy has acted as inspiration for some of this country's most influential leaders.
My name is Mark Ella. I grew up at La Perouse with a family of 12. I was the first Indigenous rugby captain. I've been inducted into the Australian Sports Hall of Fame. You don't play to win awards, but it's also nice to be recognised. David grew up in Point Macleay Mission in South Australia, like I did at La Perouse. If David was born today, he'd be easily acknowledged as one of the most brilliant minds, not only in Australia, but certainly the world. What David did was set the way for future Indigenous designers and inventors. How many people know that David Unaipon was the face on our $50 note? How many people know what he's done? Some of the inventions that he came up with were just out of this world. When I think about what he's achieved, it makes what I've done in my life insignificant.
The design of the shearing handpiece is one of simplicity, precision, and elegance, and it's one that has drawn the eye of the collectors amongst us.
Well, my name's Bob Hoyer. I live out at Sutton, just outside the ACT. I'm a professional wool classer. My first collection was probably 20 years ago when I went to a clearing sale with a mate. There was a pile of number 3 handpieces, Wolseley, in the heap the scrap metal dealer had picked up. So I offered the scrap dealer $25. He said you can have the lot for 10. So I walked away a happy customer. The availability of handpieces, particularly the old ones, are pretty rare now. The principle from the late 1800s remains the same, that is a rotating cutter over the blade, and after the mechanical ones were introduced, there were a number of different designs, being compressed air driven, electrical driven, and also vacuum driven. He was, I believe, a self-educated man. He showed an interest in things mechanical. I believe that he's not given enough credit for his involvement in the earlier days.
David's patent of the improved mechanical motion device that used the marvel of turning rotary motion into a reciprocal motion in a very small space greatly advanced the mechanical movement of the cutting blade and propelled the industry forward beyond anyone's expectation.
The manufacturers modify them each year. It could be the back joint, it could be some simple, it could be the tension nut, but in reality they haven't changed all that much, and they still do the same job.
For the better part of the 20th century, the shearing industry was the backbone of our nation. Quite simply, without wool and the men and women that produce it, our country would be a much different place. And the echo of David's legacy still resonates across the industry to this day.
My name's Ian Elkins, and I actually born and bred in a small country town about an hour and a half north of Canberra in Boorowa. My grandfather was a shearer, and ever since I was in primary school, I only ever thought about becoming a shearer. It'll be 40 years next February. As soon as I left school, I got straight into shearing. I was lucky the Wool Corporation were running schools, and I was lucky to get into one of those straight up, and I got into good habits. The plant that I sort of use all the time is a Heineger Evo. I've shorn all over Australia. I actually won an international competition in America in 1994. It's been a great career for me. I've carried the Olympic torch just through the handpiece. I won the Australian Championships 4 times. So I don't take anything for granted, and I'm very grateful for what this wool industry has done for me. I've been very, very lucky that I was in 2015. I was inducted into the Shearers Hall of Fame, which I'm very humbled by, to be in amongst some names. Dewsome Smith and the famous Jackie Howe was the original one in there. David Unaipon painted the first mechanical form of the handpiece, and that principle still hasn't changed over 100 years later, sort of thing. Like, you've got rotational motion going into the back of the handpiece, and in the middle of the handpiece, the fork there, and it changes to reciprocating motion. Over the last 40 years, the handpieces, they run a lot cooler, a lot smoother. They did, but still, the principle hasn't changed. There's not too many inventions that sort of don't completely sort of change over time or become obsolete. So it's quite amazing that the handpiece, the principle hasn't changed. Well, it's been my life, and I'm pretty lucky that I've got a training job with AWI, and I can give back to the industry. We do some demonstrations down at the Easter show sort of thing, and you might have 1,000 people there, and tell them about David Unaipon and what he's done, and hardly anyone sort of knows anything about for such a famous Australian.
While the story of David Unaipon has been largely untold, it's a story that should never be forgotten. A story of resilience, a story of determination, and a story of unbridled genius. David Unaipon, the Australian Da Vinci.